Well, my name is Guy Prestia, and I'm from Ellwood City, Pennsylvania. And I got out of high school there, graduated from Lincoln High, and then I was an apprentice machinist for a year and a half or almost 2 years. But while I was working there, we were making things for Russia because the accelerator rods and the hold down clamps and everything that we made, they were to fasten the jeeps and other vehicles on the ship to be sent over to Russia. So we didn't know really what was going on, but I was working at the time, and then the draft started up, and so I was called in for a meeting with the draft board, and I was almost 20 years old. I was 19 years old, 1942. I graduated in 42, and this was I graduated in 1940. I'm sorry, but then it was a couple years later that I got drafted, and but I remember Pearl Harbor, and I remember what happened, and we saw on the news and the movie news and things like that, and also the newspapers about the terrible thing that took place there. So that's what, in my situation, that's what started the war, because then my number was called up in the draft, so I was drafted. And I went down to Camp Wheeler, Georgia for my basic training. I had 13 weeks of basic training down there. And then from Camp Wheeler, I went up to Camp Pickett. It was near Blackstone, Virginia, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So I went up there to take mountain maneuvers. And in the meantime, the 45th Division was coming through from out west and had been to different places, different states, out Camp Barkley in Texas, and also they wound up in Pine Camp up in New York, and they came down to Camp Pickett. They were getting ready to go overseas, and I was taking training there at Camp Pickett, and so that's the division they put me in, the 45th Division. And so I was in Company E, 157 Regiment, and that was a Thunderbird division. We had that patch of the Thunderbird. It was from out west. It was made up of western states like Colorado, Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. And it was an omen, an Indian sign, that Thunderbird patch, which we had. But before I got into the unit there, the patch that we had there was a swastika, and that was also an Indian symbol. But whenever the government found out what happened there with Hitler, and he adopted that Thunderbird, he adopted the swastika, and then we had to change it. So then it was made up. So all the designs that were submitted, it had to be four-sided to represent those states out there, Colorado, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and at one time they were the National Guard from out west. So then whenever they mobilized and turned it into a unit to go overseas, that's what happened there. So we left Hampton Roads, Virginia, from there, and we had a convoy of 5 ships. And the ship that I was on was the USS Thomas Jefferson. And those were the 5 ships that went overseas. So we set sail about June the 3rd, I believe it was, in 1942. No, it was in 43. Had to be in 43. And we got to Oran about the 22nd. We were in convoy all the way over. And we didn't know. We knew that there were submarines in the area there. That's why they were zigzagging all over the place to avoid those. But they dropped several depth charges from the ships that we were on, but we never heard of anything about having any targets that they hit or anything like that. So we were there in North Africa, and we were taking some more training. We were taking amphibious landings, and we went out in the ocean and circled around for a little bit and then come into the beach and did our landing there. But while we were doing that, we didn't hit the shore at all because somebody there gave the order for us to jump overboard. So we jumped in there, and of course, the water was about 6 feet deep. And one of the friends that I had there, his name was Jesus Valles. He was a tall fellow, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", and he couldn't swim a stroke. So I grabbed his one arm, and the lieutenant grabbed his other arm, and we pulled him up to shore. But he was a fellow that I wrote his letters for him because he couldn't read or write English, and he spoke Spanish, so he was like a Mexican fellow from out west. He was from Tucson, Arizona, and so we pulled him out. So he was with our unit. Well, we didn't know where we were going to go up till that point. Then finally they handed out a flyer, and it said, "Welcome to Sicily." And we said, well, this is where we're going. We're going to Sicily. So we were supposed to go into Sicily 2 weeks before we did, but they predicted a storm was on the way, and they figured, well, this would be a good time to hit the beach because they wouldn't be expecting us, and so we would go in during the storm. But the only thing is, the storm was so bad that the breakers that were in the water were 13 foot high. So we climbed down those cargo nets. They use those for ladders. And we climbed down there and got into those little boats. They held about maybe 35 or 40 people in those. And as we were coming down in there, I can remember that there was a fellow that was up ahead of me, up above me. And somehow or other he let go. I don't know, he lost his grip or something like that. And he come tumbling down, and he hit me on the shoulder on the way down. But he went down between the LCI and the big ship. But the water was churning so bad that they didn't even look for him. You know, he was gone right away. So we were out on rendezvous area. We went out, this happened about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then about 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock is they opened up with the Navy guns, and they just threw a lot of shells onto the beach and all over the island there for what they could reach. And it was just like daylight. So that was preliminary to us going in. So the boat that I was in took off, and they made the first mistake. They gave orders there for people to fix bayonets. And they thought maybe when we hit the beach there might be hand-to-hand fighting or something like that. But I didn't have a bayonet because I carried the BAR. In basic training, they taught me with that, and I don't know why. I was one of the smallest men in the company, yet they give me the heaviest rifle to carry. The BAR it means Browning Automatic Rifle. It's a .30 caliber, flat trajectory, gas-operated, fully automatic, and has a magazine that holds 20 rounds, that holds 20 bullets in it, and the gun itself weighed 17 pounds. Then the bipod on the front weighed 3 pounds, so that took the weight up to 20 pounds, and then one magazine fully loaded with 20 rounds weighed 1 pound each, so that brought it up to 21 pounds for one rifle. So with that, I had a team there. We had a team of 3 men. Like, I would be the gunner. I had an assistant gunner. In the very beginning there, my assistant gunner was Roy Zuber. He was from Petersburg, West Virginia. And then I had an ammo carrier, because that gun fired a lot of rounds. You had to have an ammo carrier to supply you with the ammunition. So he was, his name was Clarence, now I'm trying to think of his last name, Clarence McKay, and he was from Hannibal, Missouri. And so the 3 of us were a team, a BAR team. And if you put the automatic on it to fire it, just put your hand on the trigger, you could fire that magazine of 20 rounds in 2.5 seconds. And it was a powerful gun. It was rapid fire, and it was one of the main ones. It was the fastest gun next to the machine gun, like the 30 caliber, 50 caliber machine guns. They carried a lot more ammunition for those, and they were faster firing. So it was a good weapon. So we had that. Each platoon had 4 squads in it, and then each squad had a BAR team. They used quite a few BAR teams. They had one BAR team for every so many men in a company. So that was my position and my job that I had. The water was so bad with the 13-foot breakers that out in that rendezvous area, some of those boats turned over. They never even made it to shore. And the one that I was in, now that shore wasn't like a sandy beach. There were a lot of rocks. So it was right at Gela and Scoglita, the area there. But when they had the sailor guys that drove these boats. So whenever he went there, instead of hitting a beach and then opening the front door to let us down to walk in or whatever, he hit a big rock. And he was knowledgeable enough that he kept gunning that engine up against that rock. Kept it up against the front end of it. Was probably bent up pretty bad, but he kept. So one guy crawled out and he handed his rifle down to the next one, and we pulled each other out. But before we got there, I said that they had told the people in the boat there to fix bayonets, and they were all crouched down. When we hit that rock, lots of them stabbed the guy up ahead of them. So the one guy that was like two soldiers in front of me, he got hit hard with that bayonet. So we pulled him up on that rock and onto the beach, and he lived for about, 15 or 20 minutes. But he lost so much blood that he died right there. So anyway, we worked our way into and established a beachhead there. Walked in. Then I was in on the first wave. Then they have other waves that came in after me, right? They kept coming in. About the second night that we were in there, we kept getting alert signs, look out for German paratroopers, because they might be jumping and we might be getting attacked, by the parachutists. So anyway, we heard planes flying overhead, and it was foggy. It was so foggy from the storm that you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. But we didn't know anything about the planes. Later on, we understood what the German planes were by the sound of the motor, and we could detect them. But we were new in combat. This was when we landed in Sicily, we were the first American soldiers to hit European soil. So we didn't know what planes were flying over. So, but we got that alert to look out for German paratroopers. So someplace around there, somebody started opening fire. They fired up in the air, and we all did. We just unloaded our rifles and fired up in the air. Couldn't see anything, but assuming that they were these German paratroopers and coming down. Well, whenever it broke daylight, we got late daylight, we looked around in those olive trees, and we saw some people from the 504 Parachute Regiment. They were part of the 82nd Airborne. We were shooting down our own men. They were new people in combat, first time in combat, didn't understand what was going on, and didn't have the orders sent down to follow what to do and all this. So and then the storm was ongoing so much, because even when we dropped our own paratroopers, the planes didn't hit the island. They had the people bail out, and they went bailing out right into the ocean. So a lot of them drowned in there too in the ocean, never made it to the beach. We had one of those vests that we put on, was called the Mae West, but it wasn't good in a storm. It wasn't. And then we also had gas mask we carried for a while. We didn't know whether the enemy was going to use gas like they did in World War One, but we used that. But whenever we did get to Sicily, a while later on, we just discarded those gas masks. We were realizing that they weren't going to use gas. But that gun that I had, the BAR, it also had a cartridge belt with 10 pouches on it, and they were extra big pouches because they held those magazines. So each magazine weighed 1 pound, as I had mentioned, and I had 10 of those around my waist. That was an extra 10 pounds I had to carry, plus my backpack and plus the rifle and plus everything else. It was a lot of weight. But I don't know how I did it, but being only 20 years old, you're pretty strong at that age, so you can do those things. Our first objective that we had there was at the Comiso airport. It was about 20 miles away. So we hiked all the way up there, and we had a skirmish there, and we had many of our people joined in, British troops and all that. But we went there and took over that airport, and we took, I think, 450 prisoners, and we took 120 airplanes, and we took, I think it was 200,000 gallons of aviation gasoline from that place. And like I say, with those 450 prisoners, we sent them to a stockade, which they had put up in a hurry. So I lost track of them because we kept moving on. Being in a combat unit, I just kept going from one place to another. So we went different places in Sicily, different places. And one of the places, when we hit the northern part of the island, we went to Palermo. And Palermo is a place where they had the headquarters for the mafia. That's where they were originated from Palermo. But at Palermo, they had a hotel there, a big hotel. And we were bivouacked on the hill looking into Palermo. And that night, a Stuka dive bomber came in, that's a German airplane with one bomb on it, and it dove down and let go of that one bomb. And I think it wanted to hit that one big building, which was a hotel. And but he let loose of that bomb too soon, and it hit the street on the road there. So we saw in the morning that big crater right in the street, but he missed that altogether. Now in that hotel was Bob Hope. Bob Hope and his troop. He was there with Francis Langford and Bob Hope, and Tony Romano was a guitar player in that group, and they were there to put on a USO show. So we got to see that, but that didn't take place until a couple days later on when it got organized in another area. So we went and saw it was the first USO show for the Army overseas at that time in Europe. Wow. So anyway, they took a big chance coming over there. So while we were over there, we got to see other people. We got to see, what's his name? Brown, the comedian there. Jimmy Brown? Was it Jimmy Brown? I don't know. We saw George Raft. He was over there. I saw Marlene Dietrich. And I saw Primo Canera, the fighter, the prize fighter. He was there putting on an exhibition. And he walked right by me where I was sitting. He had big feet and big hands. They called him the Italian giant. He was a big fellow. But anyway, we got to see these people, but they were taking a chance of being up around the front, with the soldiers. But whenever we got from there, we got in a rest area for a while. Then we moved over to attack Messina. So we went to a place called Ceflu and then San Stefano. Now at San Stefano was where the Battle of Bloody Ridge took place. I mean, we lost a lot of men. It was terrible fighting there, and it was probably the heaviest fighting in all of Sicily. So we went there, and the Germans tried to escape back to the mainland, and they were on a raft, going across the Straits of Messina, which is only 2.5 miles of water. So they got out in the middle of those straits, and some of our planes came over and bombed that. So they lost a lot of people. But then we lost a lot of our soldiers too, because coming down into the boats and everything, the cable broke on one of these ships that they were lowering down. One of these LCIs that lowering down into the water. The cable broke, and a lot of our soldiers got killed there by that accident. So that was where we were getting ready to go into the mainland, to hit the mainland of Italy.
Would you tell me what it was like to be in that fierce battle? What was that like? What were your thoughts at that time?
Well, most of us, I don't know how it was with everybody else, but with me, until I got in the service and took basic training, I never fired a rifle. I had a shotgun, and all I did was hunted some rabbits and quail and things like that. But I was never trained with anything else. So in the beginning, going through basic training and then also going up to Camp Pickett to Blackstone, Virginia, we took all kinds of things in the infiltration course, and we had bayonet drills, and we had grenades, how to launch grenades, and we had rifles, and we had all kinds of ammunition, guns, and different things. And so we were trained for all of that, but it was something that was new to us, and it just gave you a funny feeling. Whenever, I don't know how it was with anybody else, but whenever I came down those cargo nets, coming down there to get in that little boat, that little LCI, to make the invasion, everything went before my eyes. It seemed like everything happened like it was only a few seconds, but it seemed like eternity. Everything that you've done, you disobeyed your mother, when she told you to do something, and all these things were, and then your brothers and sisters, and you were mean to them, and you wish that you could take all that back, but all of a sudden you feel like, well, it's too late. You can't make amends with anything like that. But all that stuff flashes before you, and you wonder, boy, you could have done better. You should have been a better person. So what happens is you don't. One thing, one consolation about it is that you don't think that when you're in basic training, what's going on in actual battle. But when somebody else, not only the artillery, but whenever the rifles, machine guns, and assault rifles, when they're firing at you, then that gives you the incentive to fire back. That is one thing, But you never get to the point where you enjoy it at all. It's just something that you have to do. And then everybody in the service took care of each other. You weren't there for yourself. So we went from there, like I say, we went into the mainland of Italy, and that was at Salerno. We had to establish a beachhead there about 35 miles, and then from that point, and then we went up north. Because Italy was a mountainous territory. It was all mountains. In fact, some places the mountains were so bad that they hired mule trains and with a pack of carrying food and ammunition and everything on the mules, because you couldn't take a truck or anything up there, and it was even hard for a person to walk up there. So we were in different places in Italy, and it was rough terrain every place. So we went in all those places, and then we got to a point up there where they pulled us back. The unit that I was in, the 157, they pulled us back down to Naples. We got on an LCI ship, and we made an end run and went up to Anzio. So we were up at Anzio, and it was a place around Caracciolo was the name of the place. And it was a place there where I got a little bit of shrapnel. It wasn't much, but the wounds that I got there were very minor. I mean, that the metal that hit me in the leg and a little bit in my chest, they were nothing compared to what I saw other people get hit with a direct hit or something like that. But anyhow, they sent me back to a field hospital. And when I was in the hospital there, of course, they put me in one of the cots, in one of the beds. So I had to go to the bathroom, so I left my bed and I went outside to go to the latrine. And it just happened when the major, the doctor, came through on inspection, and he found out that I wasn't in bed. And so he waited for me to get back. And he read the riot act out at me. You know, I mean, well, who did I think I was? They're back here trying to take care of people, and I'm not there and doing this and that. And he went, and then he told me that there's nurses there and there's people that work around there in that hospital. That if I had to go, they had urinals. They could bring me one of those things. Said, and the next time you have to go like that, he says, you just yell and get a nurse back there, and she'll bring you and says, and then you can pee in that bottle. That's what he told me. But I didn't like his attitude at all. See, this is like, I was there for only the third day. And so I saw a truck outside, and I saw it had 157 Infantry Regiment. It was a water truck, a tanker. So I asked the driver, you going back up to division headquarters? He said, yeah. He said, he's going up to the outfit. I said, could I ride with you? And he said, okay. So I jumped in and I went up with him and everything. So whenever I got up to my unit, my company commander, Captain Sparks, I went up to him and I said, sir, I said, I think I'm in trouble. He said, what's that, Prestia? And I said, well, I said, I'm AWOL. I said, I'm AWOL from the hospital. I said, I left there without any discharge papers and everything. And he said, well, I don't think anybody's going to come up here to look for you. He said, they're not going to come up here, you know, up to the front lines. He says, go back to your unit there. He says, and get ready. He said, because in the morning we're going to pull out of here. So I joined them up. So I was gone those 2 or 3 days or whatever it was. So that was my experience, you know, going AWOL from the hospital.
You're the first person I've ever heard went AWOL to the front.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, so when I got to my unit, my buddies there said, you know, that they said that I look so much better. They said, man, I look in your face and you look like you're fuller in the face and everything. I said, sure, I should be. I said, because back there, I said, I got to eat pancakes and fresh eggs and things like that. I said, I didn't have to eat just those K-ration, you know, units in K-ration or either that or C-ration food. I said, I was eating real food back there in that hospital. We saw in our barracks bag, whenever we left, before going overseas, and we had 2 barracks bags each. They told us to take our mattress cover, which we had in basic training. It was white muslin material, heavy. It looked like canvas, real good material. We had that packed in the bottom of our bag, and then we threw in other stuff, our personal effects and everything in there. And we thought, well, we're digging foxholes or sleeping in the ground and things like this. I said, what do we need a mattress cover for? So some of the guys got the bright idea, you know. We'll sell them to the Arabs over there in North Africa. So that's what we did. They loved to get those things because they made clothing out of them. They rode those camels, and they wanted those white sheets and everything, the clothing and everything to reflect the sun. So we sold them to those Arab people for $20 each. We got $20 out of each one of those. We found out those were body bags. So now the government, they sent over a lot more too, you know, for the graves registration. But whenever a lot of soldiers got killed, they had a bulldozer, would dig a big trench, and they would take the bodies and put them in there, and they would take one of the dog tags. We each had 2 dog tags, which we had put tape on them because when you'd go out on night patrol, you didn't want to make any noise at all. So you didn't want them clanging around. So, but the dog tag that I have, I don't know whether they're all made like that. I have one of the original ones made out of brass. The other ones later on are made out of aluminum or something like that. But the one that I have has a notch in it, and that notch was so that the graves registration, they would take that notch and stick it up in the guy's front teeth and hit his chin like that and lock that in there. And that's for identification. So after they got the graves, after everybody moved to another area and then they were going to excavate the trenches, they had identification. They had these body bags, they had the dead soldier inside of one of them, and they had that dog tag stuck between his teeth for identification. Then they took them to different cemeteries. Up there in Anzio, they had a place called Natuna, beautiful, beautiful cemetery with those white crosses, and it's still in effect. Different places in Germany and Poland, places, Belgium, they had cemeteries for soldiers. So that's the idea, the body bags and the mattress covers. So anyway, that was another no-no. You're not supposed to sell government property. See, some of those things that I did, maybe if I'd have got caught, I would have been court-martialed and maybe put in a stockade. But I don't know. You don't think about those things at the time.
Did you see anybody get in trouble for selling things?
Well, we saw some kind of trouble in the very beginning. Whenever we hit North, there were two fellas in our company that were gay. All right, now that was before they were allowed in the military. They went through basic training, got all the way to North Africa. Then in North Africa, the government discovered, because nobody ever turned them in, but we knew who they were. But the government come in and grabbed those guys and sent them back home. They gave them a Section 8, which is like a medical discharge. So they sent them out because at that time the gays weren't allowed in the service, in the military. But now everything has changed. It's altogether different. All the laws and the rules and everything. But back then, no gays were allowed to be in the army.
Did you see people, and maybe yourself, maybe you experienced, what they used to call shell shock?
Yeah. We saw, well, it was right in Sicily too, where our General Patton, he almost got court-martialed for that because there was a couple soldiers there in that tent. It was a hospital tent, and this one fellow was shell shocked, and he had battle fatigue, and the general then, he was General Patton, and he slapped that kid and said that he was yellow. He should have been up front with the other soldiers fighting and all that. So there were people like that. But it got to be later on, whenever we went into France, and then before we went into Germany, after Italy, and then we went in southern France. I had enough seniority that they had a program called rotation. You could get to go home. It was a program they had for 3 months. You had 1 month in transit to get home, then you stayed home for 1 month, then you had another month to go back. And that was 3-month thing. But then I saw a couple of guys that did that. And whenever they came back, any time a plane flew overhead, they hit the ditch. They were just, they couldn't take it. Now, when we were up there day in and day out, with the artillery fire and the bombings and everything else, you never liked the idea, but you sort of got used to it. Your body could take a lot of stuff like that. But I turned that down. I said, if I ever get out of this thing, out of this war and go home, I want to stay out. I want to stay. And if I did go home after, the couple of months, if I was sent home and was going to stay home, that had never got me to come back over. I knew that I'd never go back in.
Really?
So I turned that down. I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay with the guy until it was over, till I would be home for good. So I turned that down. But my brother, who was over in the Pacific, he said I was crazy. He said I should have gone home and everything. I said, yeah, but I don't know. But I saw guys. But yeah, I saw some that couldn't take it. My first sergeant, Pepin, his name was George Pepin, in when we first got into Sicily. I saw him with an artillery barrage sent over there, and it came close. One of the shells came close to him, and he had blood coming out of his ears, and he ran across the field screaming and yelling, because he couldn't stand the pain. Yeah, he was our first sergeant. I saw that happen. Then I saw some other ones that got nervous. We had one guy that was from Massachusetts. He told us ahead of time what he was going to do. He said, I'm tired of this warfare. He said, I'm going to go home. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to shoot one of my toes off. He said, I can live all right without one of my toes. So Joe, I won't tell you his last name because people might find out who he is and be embarrassing. But anyway, he was from Massachusetts, so we were in the rest area. People were cleaning their rifles. All at once we heard that one shot. He had an M1, and he got up and was limping around and jumping around, so we said, oh, okay, Joe. So they sent him back to the aid station. He was back in there, and then the day after that, he comes back up in the unit. We thought in the beginning, well, Joe's going to get to go home now. He shot off a toe. He come back in there, and we said, what happened, Joe? How come you're back with us? He said, what happened, He didn't take his shoe off. So he shot through his shoe, and a bullet went between his big toe and his next toe. A 30 caliber bullet went through there, and what they did, they put some iodine, on there and stuff, and did that and sent him back to the outfit. He never lived that down. We said, hey, he said, you dumb Pollock, you're sending up here. You're supposed to be here helping us fight the Germans. He said, you can't even shoot a toe off your foot. He never lived that down.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were people that tried to do that, but some people, if you got caught doing it, of course, you'd got court-martialed for that. But some people, what they did, if they were going to shoot their foot down there, they got a loaf of bread. It's old, homemade bread, this French bread. They'd get that and put it on top of their shoe and fire their rifle through that. And that way they would pick up the powder. See, and they got away with it like that. There would be no trace of powder. So they could say it was an accident from some other gun someplace or whatever, somehow. But self-inflicted wounds, they didn't go for that at all.
Sure.
So that's what some of the guys did to beat the system, to get out of there. That's what they did. They shot through a loaf of bread.
Was there anybody who just froze and they just were immobilized and they couldn't do anything? Did you see that?
Yeah, well, we saw that several times. That happens. That happens in a fierce battle time. Whenever things get real hot and heavy, things are bad. Yeah, I've seen people that couldn't move. Now, one of the persons there in Italy came up as a replacement. And so the sergeant of our unit, he said, Prestia, go back and see this recruit that just came in. He says, he's new. He just come in earlier today as a replacement. So I went back, and this kid was about 19 years old. And they gave him an M1. And I said, do you know anything about this? He said, no. He said, I was never on a rifle range. I said, you went through basic training and didn't get to go to the rifle range and learn about the different weapons? He said, no. He said, they had me working in the barracks, like in the orderly room, things like that, doing paperwork. He says, I never got any training like that. I said, I never fired a rifle. I said, well, let me show you something. You have to know how to field strip this thing. I said, this is an M1. I said, now there's an '03, a 1903, which is bolt action. I said, what you have here is a semi-automatic. In other words, it has 8 rounds in the clip, and as long as you keep pulling, but you have to keep pulling the trigger. It's semi-automatic. You don't. On the '03, it has a bolt action. Each time you fire it, you have to lift up the bolt and pull it back and pull it forward. Another bullet goes in the chamber. I says, and on the rifle you have here, you have to keep it clean. I said, if you get sand in it, it's semi-automatic. If you get sand in it or dirt or anything like that, it'll misfire on you. And you may need it sometime to save your life, and you have to know how to clean it and keep it clean, you know. So I showed him how to field strip it, how to clean it, how to put it together, and put the parts together, and how to load it and everything else. So I said, do you understand this now? And he said, yeah. He said, I know how that works. So that night, pitch dark again, I'm at the front of the column there, and I hear this loud shot, one blast. So I walk back here and see this guy. He fired one bullet out of that gun, and that one bullet was the one that he shot himself. He killed himself. Shot himself in the head. 19 years old. Now, what would happen in that situation? The company commander would write up a citation. The papers would get back down, and probably his parents or whoever, they would knock on the door, and they would get the information that his son was killed in battle, something like that. They wouldn't say that he committed suicide, you know. Yeah, so those things leave a bad impression on you. That thing that happened there in Sicily with the paratroopers, it took a long, long time for me to get over that. But I just hoped and prayed that what I fired up in the air missed those guys. That's the only thing the only consolation I would know. But I would never know one way or another whether any of them got hit or not. But lots of them did. Wow. So those things you hear about, you see, but it's one of those things, say. Off the beach, we went in boats from Naples, and we went up to where the caves were up at Anzio. And it was at Anzio that I lost my assistant gunner, Roy Zuber. He got hit with a sniper, and he got an eye shot out. That's what happened. Now, if he wasn't wearing a helmet, maybe that bullet would have gone over his head. But he was wearing a helmet, and the bullet hit the helmet, and it ricocheted and splattered, and fragments of that came down his face and pulled out one of his eyes. And we had a hard time. He had to stay in those caves there for 3 days. We bandaged him up, put sulfanilamide powder on him, bandaged him up and everything as best we could. But the shelling and everything was so bad at that point there that we couldn't get him out of there to an aid station for 3 days. And he suffered a lot. And then the humor part of this thing is I saw him at a replacement depot when we were getting ready to go into, we had to be outfitted again to go into southern France. And I saw him, and he was getting ready there to go home. He had come out of one of the hospitals, and I laughed right in his face. And Roy Zuber, he said, "Go ahead, Presty, laugh." He said, "Everybody laughs at me." And the reason I laughed was because he had one brown eye and one blue eye, and it was comical looking because they wanted to keep that socket open, and so they didn't have another brown eye, so they had the right size blue eye, and they stuck it in his head. And so they promised him that whenever he got back home that they'd fix him up right. Well, years later, my wife and I went on a camping trip. We went down to West Virginia, down to Falling Waters, and I looked on a map and I said, "We're not too far from Petersburg. Let's go over there and I can look up Roy Zuber, my buddy, and see how he's doing." So I stopped at the post office there. And he said, "Yeah, he gets mail every day." So I stopped there, and my wife stayed out in the car. She said, "I'm not going to come up there on the porch because he might not be living or whatever, you know." So he came to the door and He said, "Yeah, can I help you?" And I looked and he said again, "Can I help you?" I said, "You son of a gun, you don't even know me." So when I started talking, he knew who I was, and he hugged me and called us in. We visited with him for a couple hours that afternoon. Yeah. But they did a good job on him. The only thing you could see was the side of his face. He had those scars from the what that ricochet did, from that steel helmet. But yeah, they fixed him up. He had two brown eyes, and he looked good. He stayed. He went to school and got to be an auto mechanic. At first, he was a driver, and he hauled steel from Wheeling, West Virginia to Pittsburgh. And then he was a truck mechanic, and he did that. But then we went and saw him a couple of times. He had heart trouble and had surgery and all this stuff. So we went to see him. Then one day, got a letter from his wife saying that he had passed away. So he was a good guy. So. From there, we went into southern France. A place that was bad was Saint Maxime, and there were other places, small towns. We went to a lot of small towns. Some of them didn't have any opposition at all. And then we went into Germany and all the way across Germany, different places. There was places like Offenburg and Reipertsweiler and Nuremberg, those places there. Battled. So then we went on, and the people there didn't know what was going to happen. So we were supposed to go into Munich. That was a place, the last place where we were going to go. And at that time, at that point, a lot of the buildings had been bombed out and stuff. And so there weren't a whole lot of big battles, but there were from time to time. But they told our commander there, he was at this point in time, he was a colonel, and they said, Colonel Sparks, swing on down there instead of going right into Munich, swing down there to Dachau. See what's going on down there at that camp, that concentration camp. So we went down there. That was a terrible place when we went there because we were hardened soldiers. We had seen a lot of people. We've seen people die. We've seen people wounded and everything. But when we saw that, we could not understand that they would be doing that in that camp. So the first thing that had to be done before we got in there, we had to take out those towers. They had four big towers with machine gunners up in top. And then inside the camp, which was run by Heinrich Himmler, he had left, and he took a lot of the SS men with him. But he's left a lot of guards there. There was like 57 guards at one time that were lined up. So when our people got inside, we weren't allowed to give them any food to eat. They were so undernourished that would have killed them. We could give them cigarettes and we could give them candy, but no food. So the guys that we saw were just stripped down. Some were naked. There were men, women, children. There were over 2,000 bodies on those rail cars that were being ready either to go into the place in the ovens there to get cremated with the other ones. Some, we saw the gas chamber, things like that. Terrible. And like I say, a couple of things happened. Whenever people saw that, a lot of the guys cried. They started crying. A lot of them vomited. And many of us did both, because we never saw anything like that. Could imagine human beings treating somebody else that badly. It was a camp, was built in 1933, was the first camp, and was the biggest one. Now at Dachau, they had some other smaller camps. They were sub-camps. But in there, the 45th Division was the first one. We were the first one to go in there. Then the 42nd, people from the 42nd Division started coming in too. They came in. So some of the people that say that they were Dachau from other units, they may have been at one of the other sub-camps. They had a lot of them. Now, I didn't know until I went to Washington that in Germany alone, they had over 300 of those concentration camps.
What did it smell like?
Bad, very bad. Like I say, every once in a while, if I think about it, I can get that smell up in my nostrils. It's something, it never leaves you, that burning flesh that they did with those ovens there when they got those people burned there. You never forget about that. But when we liberated that place, there were 31,000 at that camp at that time, that point in time. But that's, 31,000 were the ones that were alive that we liberated. But then there were thousands of them that were dead in there on those cars, flat cars. Now, in that gas chamber, Heinrich Himmler gave a German soldier an award, some kind of an award, because he invented some system. And the system was when people were sent into that place, it was their turn to be exterminated. They sent them in there to take a shower. Well, the water came on for a few seconds. Then automatically the water turned off and then gas came through there. And that gas was so bad, so poisonous, that nobody survived more than 8 minutes in that gas chamber. They were dead after that. If it was their turn to be killed that way,
And you saw those chambers? Those gas
Yeah, we
chambers?
went into all of them and saw everything. Some of the prisoners explained to us what happened in those places. They told us, yeah. Some of them had some uniforms on. They had blue and white pants, like pajama things, Some of them had a shirt on them. Some of them didn't wear a shirt. Then lots of them were just naked bodies altogether. But you could see all their ribs on them. They were so malnourished in that place. Now, in that camp were 6 Americans. There were 6 Americans. One was a major. I don't know how he ever wound up in there. He might have resisted the government someplace along the line, and he wound up down there. He was one of the guys in that camp. So the rest of them were from all different countries, out of the 31,000.
And how long did you stay there at that camp?
Well, we stayed there for just a short time. We were saved just the one day. And then we had to go into Munich. Now, Munich was the 3rd largest city in Germany, and that's where Hitler started the Nazism program. Nazism started there and at that place there, the 3rd largest, in Munich. And that was like 15 miles from Dachau. We were supposed to go there first, but they told our commanding officer to, take a turn and go down there and see what's going on down at Dachau. And what we saw is things we'll never forget. And Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, he had a lot of people come over there from the States, a lot of congressmen and people to see those camps. And he had, while he was there, he had a lot of his soldiers take pictures, a lot of photographs. They took of a lot of different camps, like from Buchenwald, from Auschwitz, and from all these other places. He said because someday there's going to be people that won't believe what happened here. And even today, there's a lot of people don't believe there ever was a Holocaust. They think it was some kind of a story that was made up. One thing that the government did when it came time to clean up Dachau, they got the citizens from that little town there to come in there and do a lot of the cleaning up. And they can't say that they didn't know what was going on at that place. Of course, they were afraid of retribution and stuff, that they were going to have something done to them, so they would never admit that they saw. But whenever you came near that place and you saw that smoke coming out from those ovens and you smelled that burning flesh, you knew that there was something bad going on in that place. Whenever we heard that the war ended, after we left Dachau, it was only several days because the next month in May the 8th, the war ended. But we had already gone through Munich, and we didn't know what we were going to do, but we were just around the area around Munich, not very far from it, when we heard about that, and then everybody just shouted, says, well, but after all, and then we talked among ourselves, And whenever we had been there at Dachau, we said, now we can understand why we were in this war. He says, up until now, a lot of the soldiers didn't know why we were in that war. They didn't know what was happening, what was the benefit of having that war. And then it was for the freedom of people. And then we understood that. And then from then on, it was one of those things. Now, I didn't go directly back because in my service record there, they have me down there being overseas for 2 years and 11 months. But I was over there for over 3 years because I was in the Army of Occupation before I came home. So we got transferred there, and I was in right north of Naples and Bagnoli, a place like that. And I had some prisoners of war working for me, you know, doing cleaning up and stuff like that. And it's one fellow that I made friends with was a German sergeant. He had told me that he was in the war. He was in college and he was going to study to be an architect. And so he found a weapon. He found a Mauser and came and handed it to me and said he found that out in the field and turned it in. So he could speak a little English. So I have his letter here that I had translated by somebody, and he wrote me that letter, and he made a suggestion. Well, not a suggestion. He wanted me to do something for him. I said, yeah. I said, I'll do whatever I can. He said that he would like to have me send him a pipe and a can of tobacco and a few pair of those white athletic socks. He said because in Germany, he said he couldn't get any of those. So from then, whenever I came home, I went up to Cleveland and I worked up there in machine shop, worked different places I worked. So I went there and I had a letter translated in Collinwood High School. They taught German in there, and so some teacher told me that I had promised them, you know, to do something. I said, yeah. I said, those 3 items I promised. So I went to the drugstore and I got those items for them and I mailed them out to them, you know. It's just, you know, after the war was over, they were no different than us. I mean, while you're fighting, they have ammunition and guns and stuff, and they're firing at you, you're firing back and doing things what you have to do. But I mean, after that, you're the greatest friends. I mean, you can't hold any. They didn't want to be in there just like us. We didn't want to be there either. Whenever I came home, it was on a ship called the Lake Champlain. It was a carrier that was slated to go to Japan. Because when the war was over in Europe, that war was still ongoing in Japan, and the atomic bomb hadn't been dropped yet. So whenever we came home, you know, on the way home on that ship, it was during the time when it was be Thanksgiving dinners and stuff. So they did real good. They gave us all that stuff, turkey and the trimmings and everything like that. Everybody got the runs. Everybody got sick because we weren't used to that good food. You know, our stomachs, our body couldn't take that. I mean, we had been eating those rations. First it was K ration and then C rations, which were canned goods, and they were a little bit better because they had beans in there and they had a little bit of that Vienna sausage, and then some of them had vegetables in them. They were good, but those other dry things we had, all they had in there was a dry food, the crackers and things like that, and a bag of hardtack, and then 6 cigarettes in each K ration. There was 6 cigarettes, and I wasn't a smoker, so I would trade with my buddies. I would trade the cigarettes, give them the cigarettes, they'd give me their candy. So we had that thing ongoing, but. Yeah, then coming home, we beat the Queen Mary's record coming home, you know, back to Virginia from Naples. We beat them. So I think they had in the headlines of the papers we made it back in like 5.5 days. Yeah, it was a brand new ship. It was on its maiden voyage. It just went over there to pick up troops for after the war. This would surprise you and it surprised everybody else. I talked this over with a friend of mine, a doctor, Dr. Gregg, who was my eyeglass doctor. And he was in the service in some other outfit, I forget what, engineers or something like that. And he asked me a question, and I agreed with him. He said, whenever we came out of the service, and I agreed with him, nobody, not even one person, came up to us and shook our hand and said, thank you for your service. Not one person. Now, there's a reason for that, because in the World War II, there were 18 million Americans that was involved in that. There were people that were not only men, but a lot of women. They had nurses, they had doctors, they had the WWIIs, they had the waves, they had all these other people. Girls that flew transport planes to get them overseas from England. All that. There were 18 million. So about every family had somebody in them that was connected with the service, and we were all coming home after the war was over, starting to pick up our lives where we left off, either going back to where we worked or start something new or whatever. And so the awareness did not take place until years later on. Now, if I wear my hat and go in a grocery store, any place, I have people come up to me all the time, and I have that cane that my son made, and he put the places I was in the service, and people look at that and they say, that's a nice cane, and then I tell them the story about it, see. But now they'll come up and they'll talk to me and say, well, thank you for your service. People have gotten educated for that. But in the beginning, nobody said a word. Nobody said a word, guys. But one thing about it is that none of us ever figured ourselves that we were heroes. We did what we had to do. But the real heroes were the ones that never made it back, never had the chance to come back. And those crosses in those cemeteries just tell the story. They were the real heroes. No matter what anything of us done, we don't consider ourselves being the hero.